Hi everyone, thank you so much for coming back to the channel. I'm so happy that you're here. This is Nisha. So over the next couple of videos, I'm going to be discussing different considerations about what to do when you're going to go see an astrologer, how to choose an astrologer, what makes a good astrologer. So things along those lines. And the reason why I want to do that is because, as I've said in my previous videos, that I have studied Vedic astrology and Western astrology, and I've gone to numerous Vedic astrologers and Western astrologers. So I was just thinking, if I were to just start that process again today, what would I want to know? So that's where that line of thinking is coming from. And in today's video, I'm doing specifically, how do I choose an astrologer? So the first thing to know is that there are several kinds of astrologers with several different expertise in one astrology over another. So, I'm familiar with this. So there's the Vedic astrology and then there's Western astrology. And Vedic astrology has become so widely known, at least more so than say just like 10 years ago or 15 years ago. I would say because of yoga and the chakra system, and even the tantra system becoming a lot more baked into all these things, and just people studying yoga, not just the physical asanas, but also just the philosophy behind it. So there's a lot of these things that come into play. Oh, and Ayurveda, of course. So with Vedic astrology, it's a sidereal system. And I'm also going to interchange it with Indian. Although I just want to say that even though it's called Vedic astrology, astrology is never mentioned in the Vedas. It's from a different sutra altogether. But yeah, so going back to that, is that the traditional Vedic system is based on the sidereal system, and Western astrology, even the regional or the different subsects of Western astrology, is based on the tropical system. Of course, there are also astrologies that are from China. So there's Chinese astrology, there's Mayan astrology, there's Jewish astrology, there's all kinds of astrology. So with Vedic astrology, it's not that it's religious in nature, because all it is all these astrological systems are patterns. They are numbers. They are patterns based on numbers. So there's really nothing religious about it. There's nothing necessarily spiritual about it. The religiosity comes into play because, Hinduism and Indian tradition and the culture is so baked into, and is so baked into everything that we do. And astrology, with the gods and the planetary mythology, is also related to Hinduism. So that's where I would say, and a lot of the pujas and a lot of the auspiciousness of the day and time is directed by astrological rules and regulations. And in fact, astrology, from what I understand, originally was never meant for the natal chart. It was meant for auspiciousness of day and time of doing certain things. So meaning certain things should be done on certain days at certain times within a certain season. So weddings, different pujas, things like that. So that's originally how I heard that Vedic astrology was used in India. And the Western and Hellenistic system there's no religion, from what I know, associated with those things, with the Western systems. So there's like that spiritual aspect. And, under the Western system, I've come across archetypal astrology. I've come across evolutionary astrology. There's also Western astrology that, a lot of people that I have followed throughout the years, they're making it more more inclusive. They're kind of changing the mythology around the traditional way of narrating astrology to people and narrating the binaries and making it a lot more inclusive, which I really love. Is that happening with Vedic astrology? No, not from what I can tell. But things are changing. We'll talk about that another time. We'll talk about that. So yeah, we'll table that for now. What's also interesting is that there are Vedic astrologers here in the West, and it was created in the West. So there are Vedic astrologers operating on the tropical system. And at one point, the tropical system and the sidereal system were one, and then the sidereal, I think, went off in its own way. So anyways, I'm not going to get into the technicalities of that, but that's also, something that's really interesting. And there are also a lot of Vedic practitioners, Vedic astrology practitioners, who are not religious about any of it. I would say most Vedic astrologers, they may have their own personal practice, of course, but they, from my interaction with even people from India, they don't push that onto their clients at all. So you have all these different kinds of astrologers that you can go to. So that begs the question, well, if I go to a sidereal astrologer or a Vedic astrologer, is that going to contradict if I 6 months later go to a Hellenistic based astrologer, or or if I go to the Vedic astrologer who is based on the tropical system, is that going to contradict what this other system says? So again, my experience is based on Indian and Vedic astrology and Western astrology. If you were to go to a Western astrologer, then going to someone who practices Chinese astrology or Mayan astrology, I can't really speak to that. But in my personal experience, going to a Vedic astrologer, regardless of tropical or sidereal, and going to a Western or Hellenistic astrologer, whether it's evolutionary or someone a little more traditional, I got something from all of them. And I can tell you that there was never one time when I was like, wait a second, that sounds not like me at all. Or, oh, this is an aspect of my chart that, it's just so amazing, but no other astrological professional had ever told me this before. Or this really sounds like me, whereas this really didn't sound like me. I've never really had that experience. So they don't necessarily, actually they don't at all, in my opinion, contradict each other. I think this is a few things. One is with Vedic astrology, and it was a friend of mine who actually kind of, talked about it in this way, and it's something that I experienced too, which was that Vedic astrology seems to be on the sidereal system seems to be more of like the soul view. And Western astrology seems to have more of that psychological daily stuff to it. And I would agree with that. Additionally, Vedic astrology, it's that soul view, it's that like over lifetimes. It's like these larger lessons, which even trying to like talk about it is, you know, is like kind of doesn't do it justice, because if you think about it, astrology is just, you know, it's a set of patterns. So you have your birth date, you have the place you were born, you have the time. There's time that exists before you were born, and there's going to be time that exists after you pass, right? So Vedic astrology takes into consideration your past lives, just because there's that pattern that existed before you were born. And of course, like that predictive element. Western astrology has that as well. I just don't know how they include all of that stuff. So in that way, like Vedic astrology, I feel like just the way they read it and probably the nature of the sidereal system is such that it, yeah, I would say it's more of like that psychical soul kind of like, you know, very, very long-term, the forest from the trees view. Definitely not the trees, although it can be. But I would say it kind of gives you that forest view. And Western astrology gives you more of your psychological makeup. Like, you know, I've noticed here that for Western astrology, there are a lot of therapists. There are a lot of like LPCs and psychologists who really tend to go into, and the mental health professionals who really incorporate astrology into their practice. So yeah, I would say those are aspects to consider. And just in general, especially if this is your first time, I wouldn't be so hard on like, oh no, I chose the wrong person, I chose the wrong system to go to, you know, I booked with this person and now a week later I find out something about this system over that system. I would just go to where you're led, go to where you're called. And if it felt like a good experience, you know, getting the appointment and it was pretty flowy and, you know, like not too many hiccups, and you generally have had a good time at least booking the appointment and you feel pretty good about it, I would stop thinking about it at that point. And this is trial and error. Will you use this astrologer as, you know, just like a grounding point every quarter? You might. Like me, I just kind of, I went to go see an astrologer and then I started learning from him. So that's kind of how that relationship happened. So it really depends on how you use it. But, you know, and then I would just like, oh, let me start with this Western astrology now. So that was just kind of my own path, and yours might be totally different. Be open to that. I know that if it's your first time, it can be really nerve-wracking, but know that you're making the right decision for yourself. And I've never once come across, with all these years and all these different people, and it's not like I was getting recommendations. I was just doing the footwork, whether it's on internet or podcasts or books that I was reading, and reaching out to several different people, looking at reviews, you know, interacting with them via email, whatever it is. So it's not like I had any inside track. But so even without like word of mouth recommendations and doing my own research, I didn't come across one person where I was just like, that was a terrible, terrible experience. That's never happened to me, not once. I mean, there was one person who's very good at what he does, and he still is very good at it, and he's very much alive in the community, and he does a lot of teaching. But he, I think, was kind of formulating a new system, and it was just a couple of years in at that point, and I went to go see him, and It was good, but it was just like I felt a little bit too much like a guinea pig, and that was the only thing. But besides that, it's been pretty good. So I would say give yourself some grace. It'll be some trial and error, like, just going to find a therapist. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And the more you do it, the more you find out that that's just kind of how it is. Sorry, I'm looking at notes. So another thing to remember is that even if you go to a Vedic astrologer and, you go to another Vedic astrologer, like if you go to two different people, you're always going to get slightly different readings, right? Like someone might be more of an expert in like romance. That might be really where they, their wheelhouse, where they really get their juice from. So in like say a natal reading, when they get to relationships or they get to their their specific area of interest that they really love talking about and that they're really into at the moment, you might get like a lot more information on that. Whereas if you go to another astrologer who's been doing it for 25 years and is, into more of financial or career, you might get less on the relationship-y stuff and more on the career stuff. So it really, you can get slightly different readings. So that's that's also been my experience. But again, it's never been to where like I felt like someone was reading a different chart when I went to different people. That was never the case. So the second point here is I would clarify the purpose of the visit. Why are you going? Are you going for a general natal reading? Is it because it's like the critical situation that you want some clarity on? Because let's be honest, most people don't go to astrologers when things are going really, really well. These days, that might be different just because it's just becoming more and more of like a support system. It's another data point. It's like, people have their therapists, they're going to yoga, they're getting their EMDR, and every 6 months they're going to an astrologer, and then like Chani Nichols, I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing her name wrong. I love her. I love her, everything that she does. That like her stuff might be, on your social media feeds frequently. You might be getting, monthly newsletters from her, right? So it's just like it's another data point. And so people these days might be going to astrologers just as a way of taking care of yourself. But if you are going, like, if you're looking for someone because of a critical situation and you don't really have a ready pool of astrologers to go to, and maybe this is, again, you're very new to all of this, then I would say that first of all, it is kind of difficult to get a good astrologer like the next day. And if someone really is available the next day, I would really do a little more research. In my experience, it's usually at least about a week. But especially at that point, if it is a critical situation and you are only able to see this person, at least according to their schedule online, in about a week, what you can do is reach out to them and say, hey, can you see me earlier? Or I'm really at this critical point. And people usually reach out with compassion and, maybe they'll be able to see you. But if not, they might give you someone else that they trust that you can go see. Or, that might give you some ideas on, like from their perspective, just based on what you tell them. Just to, if you're able to, maybe wait a week and they can give you some ideas as to how you can handle whatever it is that's going on. Not like in a therapy or therapeutic sense, but just through some compassion. And if they do agree to see you earlier, but they charge like a much bigger fee, I would not see them again, ever. So that's something else to consider. And if you are going just for like a general natal reading and it's going to be in like a couple of weeks, most astrologers these days, and I would even say like numerologists, have very clear guidance on their website, even actually for critical situations, like emergency kind of readings and stuff. They'll say like, do you have 2 questions? It'll be an hour and 15 minutes. It will be recorded, so you don't need to take notes during the session. You can, it'll be sent to you after the session. But they'll usually be very clear, and also very clear about prices, and the going rates are pretty standard. You'll see that once you start researching. I've typically paid like $120 to $180 from maybe an hour to like an hour 20, with like some follow-ups. And it of course depends on the experience of the astrologer. And people who are very good and have over 20 something years of experience have sizable waiting times to see them. The people that you're considering, I would, listen to podcasts, interviews, books, any marketing material. Excuse me, of course there's social media. And again, like, if there is someone that you're like, yeah, I really like how they talk, how they narrate, or what their perspective is, then I would reach out to them and just say hello. That way you can see how they interact with you, and you can say like, wasn't really a big fan of, even this initial contact. And of course, like, look at their philosophies, like look at in anything that they've written, and look at their progress over time. Like, what's their background like? Where are they now? Is it uplifting yet realistic? Because again, like, this whole thing of like, astrology or astrologers are going to give you the good news with the bad news. Yeah, that's fine, because life isn't all roses. Again, yeah, so that's fine. But none of us are assuming that life is all, like, none of us are walking into a session with that assumption, right? We all know, if you are living and breathing and walking and you're in this world, on a day-to-day basis that life is not a bucket of roses. We all know this. And that kind of like, when people say that, when it's like, oh, very Pollyanna to expect like, just supportive, drivel in these kinds of sessions, that kind of irritates me, because it's like, again, people aren't going because they're under some illusion that life should be all great all the time. No, they're going because they need not necessarily therapy from the astrologer, but a therapeutic space where whatever difficulties are arising is communicated in a way that has compassion, with like wrapped in hope. If not a hardcore resolution, probably not, but something that this professional can convey to you in a way where you feel that you're present in your life, where you feel like it's something that you're able to handle in life, and that you have support and that you're not alone. I mean, that's, really what all of these things are. And astrologers, will say, because it is very specific, right? So they will say that they will give you maybe some ideas on like how to approach certain things in life based on your characteristics, right? So they might do something like that. And that's also something that you can talk to the astrologer about, like, are you very specific in how you offer resolutions? Like, I'm not into that, or whatever it is you want to do. Okay. So another aspect is this is the third one. What kind of education or personal experience do you want your astrologer to have? Again, astrologers these days, Vedic, archetypal, all kinds of astrologers have all kinds of backgrounds and all kinds of different number of years of experience. So you have LPCs, or licensed professional counselors, who incorporate astrology or who have become astrologers. You have clinical PhDs, you have Jungian analysts, you have artists, therapists. You have astrologers who are very aware of the LGBTQ and BIPOC, and like being very, very inclusive in their language and in their narrative, which I think is fantastic. And so, you might just have to look for the specific combination that you want, but I would say it's more often than not definitely out there. And also, a lot of the astrologers that I went to were based, outside of the country. American astrologers, like I had one that was in England, in Portugal, of course in India, Canada. So, be open to that, So that's, something else to look at. And the fourth one is, do you want someone who just does astrology only, or do you want someone who does astrology with numerology and maybe does a tarot pull or an oracle card pull? Do you want someone that does have, there are people who study Vedic astrology who have a Catholic background, who might bring some of that, sensibility to it. So that's also something to consider, of someone who, kind of mixes different systems. And again, depending on the person, right? Everyone has their own experience, everyone has their own hobbies, and it's nearly impossible, just like any other profession, to not bring that stuff into it. Of course they're going to do it, but when you're reviewing their backgrounds, it's just something to consider. So just to quickly wrap up, how do I choose an astrologer? One is to remember that there are several different kinds of astrological systems, from Western to Vedic to Chinese to Jewish, to so many different kinds. Number two, what is the purpose of your visit? Why do you want to go? Is it a critical situation? Is it just for a general reading? Number three, what kind of education do you want your astrologer to have? And number four is, do you want just someone who just focuses on the information from astrology, or do you want someone who also uses numerology heavily, or tarot and oracle, and kind of uses different systems in your session? So that's the fourth consideration. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope this was helpful, and I would love to hear your feedback. and I will see you in the next video. Bye. Thank you.